Shortly after making my way to Great Britain, I discovered a totally different world to my recent past. I was the happiest person there. For a little while I moved from one part of London before finally settling in Kensington. After my postgraduate studies, I would have loved to settle there permanently, but I was missing some of my friends as well as my beloved son back in Australia. I wished I could witness his growing up, but it was not to be. I wondered if he ever asked after me and what response he received. Had he been punished for asking? For I knew it to be the possible reality. I contemplated on returning to Australia, but worried that the circumstances might have changed for the worst. I was unable to see any light on the horizon, for everything in regard to my ex-family and the witnesses created a very miserable-looking picture. Initially, I intended staying in Melbourne for a short while and then return to London as soon as possible. I also considered going to Perth and perhaps even start something completely different. Then I contemplated further about how miserable my life had been. It was evening, the sun had set, and I was sitting on a simple wooden park bench, watching the fishermen's boats, and the seagulls doing their song and dance in the distance. I found myself daydreaming about those could-have-been moments, and felt very lonesome. Long before my trip to London, I lived like a hermit, not making any sound, as if I did not exist. Yet I was not neglecting my friends, still meeting Ross, Mike, and others from time to time, often visiting Reg. It was sad to see his health deteriorating, and he seemed to have given up on life. Then I pondered about the unfortunate times I had to endure when living in Elwood with my daughters. During happier times, we celebrated their birthdays, and amongst the friends we had invited there was a young gentleman who had recently arrived in Australia, who I helped settle in the country. As mentioned, it was about then that I met an Italian girl, Rosa. I met her at weekends, or when she had spare time purely for companionship. There were times when she visited me, walking around the local shops, going to restaurants, and listening to music at my Toorak address. She often asked me if she could stay at my place at night. In truth, I was a little concerned about starting an affair so soon after my traumatic experiences, but felt that leaving a door open could be beneficial. There was an abandoned church in Toorak Road, and I would love to have purchased the old building, for I could turn it into a very special dwelling. Maybe even partially a gallery. However, I had to move out soon. I was going to miss that place, and the wonderful acoustics one enjoyed when making or playing music. Soon I was again accommodated in Williams Road, close to Toorak Road, for another short period of time. It was a studio flat, but was excessively humid, and I discovered that whenever it rained outside, it also poured inside, until one day it was literally flooded indoors. Our shoes were wet, and my television set was filled with rainwater. There was an abundance of black mold on all the walls. When I officially complained to the real estate agents, the Jewish owners were extremely furious about the tenants therein, believing that they must have used buckets of water to saturate the entire flat, ruining it. I needed to move out from there quickly, even storing my belongings somewhere else. When staying there, I remember the day so clearly when I presented Rosa with a beautiful silver necklace which had a few diamonds, and seeing her eyes sparkle was such a wonderful delight. I was so happy to have found and kept it long after I originally gave it to my daughter when she was in her pre-teens, and who, being outrageously angry with me for some reason, had thrown it out of the window. For some desperate and unexplored reason, Annette was often two-faced, and one could never trust her. However, her leg was probably due to multiple anomalies she genetically presented, or developed, depending on her insecurities encouraged by the lifestyle her mother promoted and her all-knowing peers she adored. I recall how she once had been cutting pieces from a beautiful fashionable white shirt which I had bought for her. She blamed the boys for cutting it when it was clearly not the case. And her form teacher asked her why she was doing it, for it would have cost her father a lot of money. Her teacher later informed me about it, saying that Annette always responded with, "So?" Magda's firstborn was clearly presenting similar characteristics to her mother. Another time, after I had moved out from there completely, as I walked to the flat in Williams Road to check if I had forgotten anything, I met two Jewish gentlemen. I told them about my friend who stayed in this unit currently being unwell, and I was going to check if anything was forgotten on his behalf. They hastily claimed that the man who lived there before was an idiot, as he had damaged their lovely flat. Loosely speaking of him, both uttered the same words at the same time, that he was either on drugs or a Muslim. One of them asked, "But you look like a decent man. Would you like to move in?" They were ever ready to accuse a man for damaging their property, which was already damaged. Perhaps they were looking for a dumb victim to pay their costs. They obviously did not realize that it was me they were talking about. I was now even more eager to get away from this absurdity and seek new adventures, to enable me to forget the bitter past which was haunting me. As I contemplated about my dark past, remembering how sad things were, I knew that my decision to travel overseas was the best thing for me. After lengthy negotiations, and on her faithful sister's and brother's advice, Magda once decided to try to get together with me, supposedly uniting the family, and I suggested trying it on a trial basis for a short while. I was very naive about this issue, as explained in more detail elsewhere, for that could not have been to rebuild the family unit, but rather either to rescue her wonderful children from the clutches of the devil, or to see if I could be persuaded to return to their so-called truth. Although I felt obliged to accept her return, I could not trust her at all, for she was still trying hard to convince the children that she could only speak the truth, and would make a better parent. In full confidence, I will say, without any assumption, one could see how one-track-minded she was, and I always had my doubts, thinking she had a hidden agenda. I can now see how naive and stupid I was when agreeing to let her stay at my place, at my home. As soon as she moved in, she started to complain about everything, including the lack of enough rooms for all of us. But the place was large enough for my daughters and me. However, if the family started to live together in earnest, we could do something about it. We were obliged to listen to her forever complaints, particularly bombarding me regarding my faithlessness to Jehovah, constantly attempting to embarrass and even interrogate me in front of the children regarding my presumed affairs with women at work and elsewhere. The children were again subjected to unnecessary and multiple arguments about issues of faith. I knew then that this endeavor was not going to succeed. A short while later, she decided to move out with Claude. It was completely her own decision. Claude was like a puppet, obeying her rules and regulations in absolute fear. I always believed that children should be nurtured and not tortured, But with my ex-wife, it had to be different, under the guise of so-called discipline. This trial period set the ball rolling, and the circumstances became worse than ever before with Annette and Birgit. Annette exhibited complete dislike towards Magda and was very unhappy about her return. I feel strongly that this so-called trial has influenced the girls badly, for both started displaying a form of mistrust and were extraordinarily resentful. On the other hand, they may have been pretending. I believe we should never have tried to get together. I was proved wrong in accepting her return. We were like two ice-cold stone pillars placed next to each other. In the human world, we always seem to hope, imagine, dream, and try, but often fail. I realized that I had no reason to stay in Melbourne, for it seemed I had nothing to hold me there any longer. I decided to get away and go to an overseas country, a place with similar social standards to those I had been brought up with, and settled on Great Britain. As I said earlier, even if it was going to be for a few months or several years, it could prove to be healing. After corresponding with some old friends in London, it looked very promising. I was going to use my corrected name when I finally got my new passport and other documents. Excited about my new adventure, I could now relax my frayed nerves, unnecessarily crowded mind, and become creative again. If and when I decided to return back, I could probably try somewhere I had not previously been. My memories kept repeating, and my head felt like a bee's hive. Particularly after my daughter's treatment of me like a heap of refuse and completely abandoning me, there was nothing to keep me in Melbourne. I always preferred honesty and sincerity in all things I did and thought. The variety of belief systems, myths and philosophies, historic and current, have taught me a few good things: tolerance, caring, charity, and acceptance of all people in the world, no matter what background they are from, no matter what race or color they belong to. Unfortunately, some people in important positions and their religious leaders have added a few twisted ideas into their faith in order to control the masses for their own purpose. According to historic research, the Romans, for instance, demanded all good Coptic Christians to think of the next world and their future rewards in the afterlife. They were advised not to be too materialistic, offering all their crops to their Roman masters, and were encouraged to believe it was the humbleness taught by Christ. Those who were convinced about it being the right choice lived in the harshest possible way to gain God's favor. In other words, living in a state of penury, dependent on charity. There are so many stories to ponder upon. Think about Johnstown and the mass suicide certain cult members committed. They followed their cult leaders exclusively, believing they were to be rewarded in the next world as the chosen to partake in God's kingdom as promised by their holy masters. They indeed committed the ugliest deed one can imagine. In this way, they were supposedly going to avoid the wickedness of the world. This thought alone is dangerous to the world and humanity's future, for it leads to hopelessness in people's lives, driving them to do the unimaginable as an easy way out. Is this what God wants humanity to follow? Instead, people should work hand in hand for the betterment of their lives, for a fantastic future. Throughout the years, many cultist groups have been developed, dividing people and using so-called biblical truths as they interpret to suit their own ends. Without prejudice, they have done great harm to man's civilization. Many became the doomsday preachers in their dreamt of realities. Many still teach that the world has become evil and getting worse all the time. It is time to stop and take stock. Perhaps then one can discover how some of their leaders have been disillusioned and bitter about the world they were living in. Having turned to the Holy Scriptures to find comfort, have they really discovered what they were looking for, or have they discovered more doom and gloom, jealousies and much bloodshed in the name of a God they have imagined? The Bible is very flexible in the hands of people. You can describe all kinds of information as you imagine to promote your ideas by using it to your advantage, and others will blindly follow you. Do not leave our organization, for out there is danger and sin, and there is more, eternal damnation. When you consider what those groups and their leaders have been doing to this day, you can see how they have been surrounding the world with thoughts of complete hatred and devastation. We can see the results as witnessed by current worldwide events. Remember, energy cannot be destroyed, but can be manifested in many forms, and thought is a form of energy. What would happen if humanity increasingly thought of peace, understanding, and acceptance of each other? Can it be done? Yes, if humanity is able to wake up from their long-lasting slumber and open their eyes to reality. They can then perhaps see beautiful, uplifting things, having ideals based on unconditional love, which is applicable in their daily lives. I have no doubt that the human race is capable of living like a whole new generation. Will that ever happen? Yes, if they can refrain themselves from competition in destroying each other, lay down all their destructive weapons, and share a whole treasure of wonderful wisdom buried in their past. Perhaps then, at least symbolically, they can rebuild a magnificent stream of life on earth. Humans are capable of doing so, as they have proved throughout their history. It is also said that thoughts are things, and humanity should be encouraged to use them wisely. Do you notice how advanced humanity has become with their technological prowess? Now imagine if the whole of humanity would use all their powers to assist the needy and create unity in all their undertakings to overcome poverty instead of killing innocents with their war efforts. What a wonderful world they would be living in. You might think of me as an idealist, if you like, although I prefer to be known as a realist. I learned the values of tolerance, justice, and brotherly love in Judaism, the aspects of unconditional love and values of peace in Christianity, the humbleness and being at peace with all others in literatures of Islam, but I have never seen any such ideals being truly practiced in the world. Not even those wonderful considerations found in Buddhism, and the concept of following the middle path while doing all things unto others as we want them to be done unto us, has been practiced. Our world is filled with thoughts of destruction without accepting what is whole, loving, and healthy. This is not a negative assessment, it is the truth. Humanity has been surrounded with much negativity throughout their long and arduous past during their maturing years. In fact, we can confidently say that they are now experiencing the consequences of their mistakes. Does this sound outrageous and extreme? Let us consider just one aspect of earth dwellers we all share our lives with. The issue of discrimination, and we are all very familiar with this word. It comes in many forms and is usually the precursor towards negative assessment of others, judging them in a negative light according to our personalized standards. Conversely, judgment and discrimination are not the same, for we judge everything, every event, and people all the time by appreciating or not agreeing with them. For example, this color suits her better. That tea does not taste as ideal. The weather is so beautiful today, not like yesterday. When people start discriminating or assessing others according to their inabilities, educational backgrounds, race and language, comparing them with this or the other system, religion or nationality, as with our own supremacy or understanding as the only norm, we begin to generate the well-known human characteristics of dislike, enmity, jealousy, superiority complex, and separations. Sadly, this still remains the trend we humans have not yet fully advanced from. It has remained this way since man was introduced to this planet for the first time. Majority of these trends are inherited and fear-based. Fear has led people to the creation of multiple beliefs, more separations, and conflicts. In order to prove their supremacy, slavery and misery was invented. There were also those who, with thinking minds, although they have also been segregated and unrecognized, only a few were able to gather like-minded, but once again, more separations followed, and multi-belief systems fostered. This is a vitally important tableau for the awakened to take note of. Human conflicts, enmity, and resentfulness will not help. They need to observe this anomaly together and unite before it becomes too late. Once people start the process, others from different recesses of the universe and dimensions will be able to begin to fast-track progress into a brighter future. And that is when humanity will see the light, their knowledge increase to superior heights, their lives expanded, talents and prowess becoming higher than what they have ever known. Let us not forget that humans have the capacity to improve and become highly advanced beyond their wildest dreams. This is not science fantasy, it is the reality. When you think at the current world of humanity more realistically, what do you see? Consider the worldwide political systems, religions, social ills, and suicidal tendencies among people, and tell me where we are now. I am sure that you are also thinking like me, but what are we doing about it? Do worldwide military intervention strategies assist humanity to live in peace? Did we create more fear, perhaps? Has any type of discrimination, be it color, race, belief, or gender preference, helped men to live in peace and be inventive? Consider also the cultist movements, which separate people as good or bad, perhaps even shunning them, leading to suicide. They are one of the greatest culprits towards man's tragic downfall. And again, this is said without discrimination or condemnation. Religious and political intolerances do not help. Without being critical, today's belief systems have led mankind to the brink of extinction. Ponder on how many suicide bombers have killed so many innocents because of their supposed beliefs. How long will this continue? Think about what misery cults like the Witnesses have created. The holy book they speak of holds a mirror to their faces, showing them where they are now in the light of their long and troublesome history, but which they seem oblivious to. Holy books have also been used to promote separatist, discriminative ways, whereas they can be utilized as principles in their purity for humanity to follow towards unity and peace. Man's belief systems have failed him. Their separations, political, socio-economic systems are crumbling. What is left? I shall remain neutral, not taking sides with any religious system or deity to adore and worship. I never desired to force my own ways on anyone, not even my children, family, or friends. Some friends have accepted me as I was with all my thoughts. Others, just like my family and children, have condemned me forever as a wrongdoer. I learned the value of tolerance and patience throughout my youth, and the value of forgiveness, which does not indicate any form of self-weakness. Most importantly, I learned the value of love. Going back to my story, when in Britain, my attention was particularly directed to those wanting to emigrate to Australia, almost all of whom were talking about Perth and Western Australia. Although I had been there several times to see how that city scored, I needed to discover more about Perth, for something seemed to be very special about it. I pondered for a while, thinking that my next destination could therefore be the West. Besides, I seemed to hear a youth's voice speaking to me intermittently, almost begging me not to abandon him. But had I abandoned anybody? Once I had a family, 2 beautiful daughters, and a son I did not know well, for he had unlawfully been taken away. Yet he would probably sound like that youth I kept hearing within my imaginative mind, calling me Dad. That voice echoing in the distance most certainly belonged to a boy, and not the girls, for my daughters were so severely conditioned to see only the ugly things about me, which were incorrect, for they were forced to believe that I did not care for anybody under the influence of an evil source. I suppose I was a bad dad for not allowing them to only eat junk food, or encouraging them to keep themselves clean and healthy. And the worst thing was that I did not allow their boyfriends to sleep with them. It was my parental responsibility to watch over them until they reached a certain age, but I was not interested in preventing them from having basic human rights. Annette's attitude was progressively aggressive towards me, and because she could not get me hurt, or have everything only her own way, she became more and more hateful, for she could obviously not be any other. As I said, she only knew what hatred was, for that was her love. But was she not emulating the characteristics of the witnesses indirectly, as inherited and fully practiced within her family? However, I was never a part of that family, separated and shunned. It felt as if this behavior was genetically transferred to Annette through her mother, and if someone questioned her why she hated her father, she did not know how to answer other than shrug her shoulders, saying, "I don't know." I felt shattered, not knowing how best to deal with the situation at hand, and hopefully repair what was broken. When I suggested she stay with her mother for a while, I honestly believed it could help her in the long run, as she was obviously not happy with me. As I explained before, she had the tendency to exaggerate everything, thus creating mountains out of molehills. She took all my suggestions as if I was throwing her out, always ready to attack me, and at least destroy my reputation. My beloved child behaved like a monster towards me, yet I still cared for her welfare. In reality, I had no answers why it was so. I could not fully understand why she developed such behavioral characteristics of telling lots of fabricated stories. Was it to make her look interesting, gain the sympathy of her friends, or appear to be no less than them? Repeating myself, this became so evident after her abduction by those so-called friends, and later being deposited in her mother's alleged care. Who knows what lies have been told to their mother, who was ever ready to believe in anything spoken against me? What Annette had been subjected to by her German grandparents as an infant was having a definite effect on her now. Magda took the whole story to her only friends, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and in turn they advised her what to do and how to live. Although my daughters lived with me a lot longer than my beloved son, they were not able to understand or appreciate me, nor did they ever acknowledge me. They were well conditioned by the cult of Jehovah. Even my dear child Birgit chose her mother's beliefs, and after her sister's departure also left, following her mother's advice not to associate with her father, therefore writing on a piece of newspaper the words that I was meant to understand easily, as she later claimed. It was apparently better for her to go away, and that I could live with their memories. I believe that their heart was always with the witnesses and their mother, despite their choice to live with me. It still hurts. I should never have expected anything truthful or reliable any more. Only their attempts to justify their falsehood. The voice I heard, perhaps only in my imagination, could not have been hers, because none of them had any genuine love towards me. And this way Magda and the witnesses she associated with were very happy with their achievements. I was certain that the voice I heard could only be Claude's. It was almost like a communication through the unknown elements belonging to the universe, making it possible for us to hear each other. I was sure that one day it would become clear, and we would all know the truth. If what I imagined was real, would he also feel my thoughts? Would he feel how much I loved him? Would he sense that I had forgiven all the hurts I had been subjected to? I also knew that they were going to be brainwashed further, to completely forget me as if I did not exist. Since I was painted with so many lies from within the fantasy creation of a few short-sighted humans, I was considered as the evil without it being so. I am certain that it was due to my looks and different viewpoints on life. For instance, consider the German government's warning to Magda when we got married about my alleged Muslim heritage, and therefore me possibly being a violent man who would restrict his wife in living a decent life, as observed all around today's world, particularly in Middle Eastern countries. Furthermore, Jehovah's Witnesses could only separate and break down those who they judged in the name of God as sinners, thus leading to family breakdowns and personal fears about being destroyed during so-called Armageddon. I could almost hear them shout, "Stay with our organization, for outside is full of desolation and destruction." More members meant more strength and power. Anybody dropping out from our magnificent organization of God is disastrous for our leadership. I therefore knew I had lost my entire family to their fantasy creations. I knew that my daughters had the tendency to tell believable stories of untruths when they deliberately tried to play us parents against each other. I was determined to no longer believe in their fantasized views against their mother, and decided to ignore their crocodile tears, hoping that one day they would mature in intellect. However, what were they feeding their mother with? After all the experiences I was subjected to, I could not trust them, but hoped that one day they would become wiser. I felt extremely sad about my son, who was so young, gentle-natured, and could easily be sucked into a restrictive system wherefrom he would never be able to escape when he was older. A restrictive lifestyle under absolute witness control and multiple punishments would turn anybody into a restrictive person giving no chance for others to be themselves. Such a person would not know how to be happy and make others feel comfortable. At this stage, I could only hope he would grow up quickly and see the reality of things for himself. As soon as I decided to return to Australia, I felt as if I was listening to a choir of people from distances far and yet so close, singing a song of Perth. I had never experienced anything like that before, and took it as being inspired from the thought universe that there was perhaps something special waiting for me there. At this time, I had no idea and no physical reference points concerning my children's whereabouts. I was sure that Magda, with her brothers and sisters, would do everything possible to keep the children away from me. Every one of them sang the only song well known to them. Nobody judges anybody. Is that why they have shunned me forever, just like many others all around the world? They proved themselves to be extremely judgmental and extraordinarily discriminative. I concluded that they obviously had no human feelings to understand my or anybody else's standpoint. My first daughter was extremely hateful towards her mother for being guided to believe in the ways of her close friends with their biased ideas. Also very hateful towards her father, for he did not fulfill her personal needs, and did not allow her boyfriends to scratch her itch. Alas, within her unstable mind, she became bitter and hateful to everybody. In reality, she was a hate machine, and I cannot forget how she attempted to murder her mother with a pair of scissors. However, I cannot be too sure, as this story was relayed by Birgit, who also told many lies. I trusted that her mother knew that it was Annette's own decision to commit such an evil deed, for I never encouraged it, nor would ever do so. I hoped that Magda had reported this incident to the legal authorities in order to curb the unusual hatred her wonderful daughter displayed. But sadly, knowing how naive and vulnerable Magda was, I believe she probably thought it was instigated by me. The truth is that Annette was deceptive, even at that age. Sadly, Birgit was not much different, perhaps even thinking she could control her mother's mind by telling her stories which Magda believed as if true. Even as a child, Birgit became a hopeless liar in almost all aspects of her life by imitation. How did I know, I hear you ask? By discreetly psychoanalyzing, I assessed her when she was fantasizing things and events as she learned from her sister or school friends, telling me how she loved me on one side and yet on the other telling untruths about me, particularly when in her mother's presence. They knew their mother did not want to hear anything nice about me, and so telling her what she wanted to hear was justified in their eyes. I have known them claim to have seen me perform magic to hurt others, something which I wholeheartedly opposed, but also knew that Magda and her friends believed Birgit's fantasies as being true without question and any validity. My interests and studies into the science of the mind were always considered by opposers to scientific knowledge as something akin to soothsaying or conjuring up spirits. As mentioned before, my daughters spent a lot of time with me when still very young, but forgot everything nice that happened during their childhood. They chose to remain ignorant about my standpoint and did not really know anything about me. Their dreaming minds created a unique world of fantasy in which they considered me as an evil magician who conjured up evil spirits casting evil spells, none of which was true, but tell it to Birgit and hear her deny it, condemning her father as evil, as per Magda's misguided beliefs. My daughters were continually subjected to hypnotic suggestions by everything repeatedly being preached, every time their mother and her associates had access to them. However, I am not going to blame my daughters for their ungainly behavior, for it is fostered by the real evil created by Jehovah's Witnesses. The truth of the matter is that, like many other parents, I had joked about things and played games to entertain my friends, but obviously they took everything very seriously under some instruction. Unadvised from her associates, Magda was constantly asking them if their father had done this or the other magic act, and to keep their mother appeased, they exaggerated their stories in addition to a plethora of lies, infuriating her further against me. She would then take the whole story to her brothers, and they would advise the children that their father's practice of magic was evil, which they should avoid. As this model was constantly adhered to, it became their ultimate truth. This was most certainly what had become their belief, for when I was told things which I had supposedly conjured up, I was taken aback by its incongruity, but Birgit had a solution for that as per her mother's directives. The devil had taken her father's mind due to his delving into spiritualism and magic. Now she was telling me that I was not a good person when we lived together. Obviously, her personalized lies had to be rendered into my personal characteristics. Otherwise, how could she get out of being found out, telling untruths all along? How would she feel if her mother discovered that Birgit had been feeding her with multiple lies about her father? If Magda's memories are intact and she is open-minded, she might be able to discover the truth. I suppose one should never expect Birgit to correct her ways, for I had to accept their assumptions as my truth to satisfy their needs, perhaps even apologize for my alleged wrongs. This will never happen. Their ability to convince their mother was remarkable. They only wanted to believe that I was like them, telling stories. Whatever colored glasses they were wearing, their world was likewise colored. Unfortunately, Birgit also came across as being the most two-faced young lady ever since that meeting at the Meyer stores after many years of separation, although I wished she would change for the better. I loved her as my child and had forgiven all her weaknesses, but alas, I could not forget those past memories. Years later, she still believed that her father was telling fables, and that she allegedly knew when he told a lie. I was deeply saddened by their hateful characteristics. This naturally made me decide not to have anything to do with such treacherous behavior any longer. Obviously, she could only tell lies about her father telling lies, probably treating it like a game. I am certain that whatever fabrications she made up would be believed by her mother and young brother, thinking that perhaps being a young man, he was expected to be silly enough to accept anything as true. They believed in their own self-made dark fantasies so much that they became their only reality and an integral part of their being. If I could turn back the clock and had a chance to explain things to them, I would tell them what the honest truth was. Alas, going back in time is physically impossible. But maybe in the near future such time travel will become possible. Who can tell? One thing is definitely true. Past could not, nor should ever be attempted, to change. Whatever was done remains. When I returned to Australia, I felt that it was paramount to make major changes to my day-to-day existence. I no longer had a family, and my government employment was no longer available due to new policies which the current political party was implementing. Although I could continue lecturing on a sessional basis at the university, I had to be prepared for new and unexpected circumstances. Furthermore, I was assaulted several times, and was often told by those assailants and its boyfriends she had paid to hurt me that I deserved to die. Without knowing what my so-called grave mistakes were, I obviously needed to make a few drastic changes, and I elected to start something different. After some research, I decided to settle in Western Australia. Perth had a very interesting reputation, and everybody contemplating traveling to Australia was subjected to excessive propaganda about the charms of the city. My returning to Australia had to have a good reason, and settling in Perth might be the change I needed. But what was I going to do there? I thought perhaps I could open a shop. It could be an art materials one, where I could display my own and other local artists' works, as I did once before. I could also conduct art classes for the young, and even encourage schools to have their students' work displayed. I could be part of a new art movement. There were some suburbs in Perth which were more suitable for art exhibitions, and Fremantle, Subiaco, and Victoria Park came very close, with a number of marketplaces, eateries, tattooists, photographic studios, and art shops. Perth seemed to have become the most popular destination for the English and Scots. In London, hopeful immigrants were talking about its weather and perceived similarities to the English ethos. That part of Australia could therefore be a nice start. However, there was something else drawing me there, almost physically forcing me to go to Western Australia. Some might think of it as magic, but I say it was deeper than that. It was almost like the cry of a young heart, lost in the desert, calling me to the rescue. It was almost singing in my ears emotionally, as if asking me where I was. It was like the voice of a young boy crying and asking me why I had abandoned him. It was so extraordinary and so unusual that it made me cry, and this went on for a very long time. When I finally decided to go to Perth, the cries I had heard so often turned to laughter, and this was like confirmation that it was a good decision on my part. Maybe I was tapping into some other aspects of existence which was not yet discovered, or it was due to my psychological state at the time. But I could not comprehend why I particularly chose Perth. I had no friends there, and certainly no family, as they had abandoned me when I lived in Melbourne. I would eventually discover what the universe was relaying to me. I was yet to learn much later that Magda had settled there after abducting the children. In other words, taking them away from the influence of the worldly devil worshipper that was me. Before my London adventure, I took a number of bus trips to Perth, and my very first journey from Melbourne over the Nullarbor proved to be extraordinary. I was discovering a road trip which took 3 days to Perth. On the way, passengers were made to feel very comfortable and encouraged to walk around as little as possible, although young mothers and others often needed to use the restroom at the back of the bus. Music streamed through the sound system was appealing to only a few people, and I could do without it. People's excited speech, just like the waves of the ocean, were rising up to a crescendo and dying down repeatedly, drowned out by other naturally present sounds. Some people displayed their habitual traits, while some drunken youths and even mature-aged people made complete fools of themselves. One could easily see the validity of the saying, "There is no fool like an old fool." There were children and families, and some preferred to sleep throughout the journey. When the bus stopped at the in-between stations, where one could get out, enjoy refreshments, wash oneself, and be able to walk for a short time, it proved to be a great change from the devastating consequences of sitting for long hours. Otherwise, it could be agonizing for anyone's circulatory system. In my case, I prefer to create every possible but good excuse, such as organizing the passengers to change seats from time to time to get to know each other better, and then return back to their original seat, thus helping them to move their legs. Interestingly, they all enjoyed this unusual game, and both drivers did not worry about this. For some reason, I loved organizing little programs for people around me to feel comfortable and enjoy the experience. I took lots of photographs, chatted with people, and listened to their stories. There were also those who preferred to continue telling dirty jokes, and it seemed they did not know any better. Since they were happy with their game of words, I left them to their own devices as long as the children and young mothers were not affected. The atmosphere was very friendly and happy, although the air conditioners were noisy, and some folks still kept going with their sexually oriented jokes, making a few people, including myself, feel uncomfortable. It was a unique gathering of people who occasionally sang a few country and Western-style songs, creating a country atmosphere. Personally, I enjoyed my short break for lunch in Adelaide and walk into the city centre. I remember how very dusty the roads were. The weather was very hot, and the temperature felt like rising even higher. The people on the streets and in the restaurants were very friendly. One could greet them and be responded to, just as in other parts of Australia. Alas, in some parts of the world, if one attempted to greet a stranger, they would usually either be completely ignored or else chastised. I have come across such people in Germany, England, and even in Melbourne. But the city of Adelaide was different. Adelaide's people were friendly, and surprisingly, the number of people I met there were of Germanic background. Practicing my German was a great delight. My impression of this great city of cathedrals always remains as being a very cultural, artistic one, while retaining its uniquely Australian character. In fact, I thought I might make Adelaide my home one day. Now, everybody refreshed and back on board the bus, we began to traverse the long and typically monotonous Nullarbor. Some kept going with their songs and supposed jokes. Others entertained fellow passengers with their laughter, and sometimes with utter nonsense. There were those who preferred reading their newspapers, which they had probably already read a few times over, and some chose to sleep. Many of them were returning home after visiting Melbourne or Sydney. There were others who were going on holiday, and those who were seeking employment anywhere in Western Australia, even within the mining sector. I, on the other hand, was one of the odd numbers, going for a visit and discovery. Whichever way one observed the Nullarbor, everything looked just the same, except for kangaroos, some of which with their young hopped around the bus from time to time. Some people told me that a few of them got killed on the roads. Obviously, a speeding bus could not stop for a kangaroo. When we arrived at places like Ceduna, Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie, meeting native Australians was a highlight of my journey. Although we had been warned against meeting them, and I was yet to understand why, I was determined to speak to at least one of them. A kind Indigenous woman introduced me to her sons, and I noticed how respectful they were towards her. She was also probably one of the tribal elders, or held some important position. We were told not to offer them any money, which they sometimes demanded, but I found giving them a little gift even before they asked for anything was very gratifying. Seeing the eyes of young children laugh with joy was the greatest treasure. I was soon surrounded by more children with their glowing eyes, dark brown skin, and unusually orange-red hair. Soon I had to catch the bus, but they all invited me back to their home, and I decided to visit them sometime in the future. Maybe they sensed how keenly I was interested in spending some time with them, discovering about their unique culture, and if I could be of any help for their children's need for education and sports or medical needs, I would be happy. A couple of other native ladies and a gentleman approached me before I left, asking if I was interested in staying with their tribe, as they wanted to introduce me to two beautiful girls. It was not my interest. However, I told them I was going to come back, upon which the lady who greeted me initially said that they felt something about me only I could understand, and they had a feeling I was their white brother. I needed to tell them exactly how I felt, and several months later I kept my promise and was greeted as their white brother. Back at the bus station and restaurant, I needed a nice cup of tea and snack. There were many passengers enjoying hot drinks and barbecued kangaroo steaks. There were also a number of motorbike riders dining. I ordered a cup of tea with jam and scones, as nothing else appealed to me. Alas, I regretted getting those items, for my tea was made with seawater and was extraordinarily salty. I took a sip and immediately returned it back. The girl looked amused and said I should specify whether I wanted the normal cup, as locals enjoyed, or bottled water if I wanted a cup of tea, as we were accustomed in the East. I certainly enjoyed my tea made with bottled water, which cost an additional few cents. One of the bikers, having noticed my dilemma, asked if I was new in the area and explained that drinking salty water was normal here. My journey was very educational indeed. Another bikie standing next to me, noticing my curiosity, told me he hoped that my previous drink did not taste like being made of urine. I told him I was not familiar with the taste of urine, and could not tell him which was which, and bottled water was fine. "Nay," said that young man, "don't worry. We don't use piss here to make our tea, mate." And everybody started to laugh. Obviously it was meant to be a joke. Finally, arriving in Perth, I took a metropolitan bus trip into the centre of the city, which did not take long. Soon I was looking around, trying to see where the city centre was, and thought I must have arrived in the outskirts of Perth. I looked at some shopping arcades, a small number of tall buildings, but I could not recognize Perth as seen in images of the city as shown on television or in newspapers. I could certainly not compare it with others like Sydney and Melbourne. For a brief moment I felt lost. I also thought that this was probably a small portion of the city. Noticing a young police cadet nearby, I asked him if he could direct me to where the city centre was. He looked at me and started to laugh, saying, "So, you are new to our lovely city?" I answered him with yes, and I heard so many good things about Perth. I have also seen many beautiful images of this great city. Here I am. His colleague arrived, saying, "Welcome to Perth, sir." The other officer then told me that I was right in the center of the city. I asked them if they had been to Melbourne. They had not, but were thinking of visiting. When I told them that I had just arrived from Melbourne and was thinking of staying in this magnificent city for a while, they were extremely happy about it. I further told them about my interest in finding a place to live and hopefully be employed as a lecturer in one of their universities. Then I asked where I could have a good breakfast and cup of real coffee. Both directed me to the Carillon. Very curiously I walked there, wanting to try my first cup of Perth coffee at the very first coffee shop which appealed to me. I felt all alone, knowing no one. Of course, I could start everything anew, but was I really alone? I could make new friends and help people discover the little jewels we as humans have in our hearts by teaching art or by lecturing at one of the well-known establishments there. For a brief moment, I drifted into a world of daydreaming while sipping on my coffee. I remembered a Bible story where an olden Hebrew patriarch has been mentioned and whose daughters gave him wine, and he was so drunk. If the story was at all true, had his daughters any respect towards their father? Then I pondered that obviously my first daughter had no respect for me, especially since her abduction all those years ago. Psychologically, it is a well-documented reality that memories can be easily altered, and new memories of positive or negative kind can be placed in a normal functioning mind. Unfortunately, my daughters had become so bitter and hateful towards me, making me wonder why she chose to stay with me in the first place. Why did she want to destroy my reputation? It puzzles me even today. Those who interfered with her mind at such a young age have indeed caused great harm, as they have with so many other people. If anyone asked her why she hated her father so much, she would invent all sorts of make-believe stories. She was so badly influenced to believe her father was a terrible person. I cannot imagine Annette today changing her mind. My other daughter was also similarly influenced to consider me almost as if I was a stranger, her mind molded by her sister and mother that this man could not be trusted, and he was allegedly practicing black art. The science of psychology was considered by a few incapable of thinking for themselves as practicing occultism, and my beloved daughters' young minds were twisted to believe they have seen me casting spells and conjuring up spirits. False memories were created for them so conveniently that what they might have seen elsewhere or been told by others with great imaginations were superimposed onto my persona. Many years passed, and having no chance to have it clarified as to what the reality was, they remained with what became their integral memories, believing it to be the only truth. Years later, I was still discovering more of their accusations of me, with a multitude of wrongs, without knowing the facts, instead parroting their mother's words. Again, I will avoid sounding as if I was blaming Magda entirely, as she was completely mind-controlled by the real evildoers. It seemed that they knew me better in their dreamt of reality of things. They insistently condemned me. It seemed that they knew me better in their dreamt of assumptions than myself. No matter how hard I tried to explain the reality of things, they insistently condemned me, but I did not know what reason I would have to lie or be dishonest. I will say that after all the proof evidence all over the world about all the lies witnesses have been discovered preaching, they need to hide their own untruths by blaming others for lying. I am proud to have rejected all kinds of absurdity, for this has never been a part of my personal principles. Likewise, I never wanted to see any adult treating the young inappropriately because of my allegedly being an alchemist, and worse still, an atheist. questioning the spirit for which I was disfellowshipped by Magda's fellow brothers, as if I was one of them, whereas I never was. I never supported the archaic Jehovah's Witness beliefs about women as subservient and second-class citizens. This is also why I cannot accept their so-called truth, which declares that both genders are equal, while denying women's rights we observe today. What they preach can, therefore, only be a lie. As I was described being wicked due to ungrounded accusations of some people, without the ability to think, one needs to question why all my friends and neighbors chose to leave their children with me when they had important engagements or doctor's appointments to attend. I even had primary school, kindergarten responsibilities to assist teachers and parents after a thorough police investigation of my background. I was a fully trusted member of society. It seemed that my once-upon-a-time sweetheart was determined to punish me through her children for the sins she thought I might have committed. She was in truth only pleasing her faithful brothers and sisters. Remember also that her daughters had continually been making up stories about me, loosely relaying those untruths to their mother. I am certain that they only wanted to help her feel good about her ungrounded suspicions, born of my supposed wickedness. Noticing how happy she felt about her alleged knowledge of my character due to the racial differences I presented. My accent was yet another issue in her eyes, for as far as she was concerned, I could not even form complete sentences and make sense. Because the witnesses happily talked about my assumed characteristics of being a servant of the devil due to being righteously disfellowshipped, or just being me, I had to be portrayed as someone opposing God and therefore evil. This was repeated so often that it created a hypnotic effect in Magda's daughters' minds. Obviously, their mother's teachings were more important to them. Now their minds were so conditioned to see me as the all-evil, conjuring up evil spirits and casting evil spells. Lies they created about me over the years became their integral reality during the time they spent with Magda. In her completely naive state of mind, their mother took their lies as truth and further strengthened their invented and accusative references as the only reality. Evidently, they had never believed in me in the first place, and certainly never cared to know anything about my true identity. Repeating, in their eyes I was a liar, and their mother could only speak the truth as a faithful servant. However, in the face of real truth, one wonders how they could live with their treacherous lies and pretensions. Maybe Birgit also has an answer to that. Remember, for every action, there is a reaction. If there is a real God, known as Jehovah, and not created by man, would he believe in those lies and punish someone forever being accused by them? If that God was truly righteous without displaying human characteristics, would he not show those accusers the right way of thinking? Remember, God is portrayed in the Bible as being almighty and all-righteous, commanding his servants to worship him in truth and righteousness. Throughout their existence, the witnesses have presented a tenet uniquely theirs, but in the process their deeds have destroyed so many people who trusted them. By doing what they do, it can only be a reflection of who their God actually is. The whole story was like a nightmare, which kept repeating just the way I have been repeating these memories. In the circumstances, it was better to forgive and let them go. Let their God deal with them. Perhaps they should read their Bible more prudently and open-mindedly before committing themselves into the great sin of being totally self-righteous. As confirmed years later, What I used to hear about Magda's discipline of the children was proved true. Even Birgit, a long time after, separating herself from me on advice given to her by the person who supposedly could only tell the truth, told me likewise, and those words still remain fresh in my mind. Your dad married me in the truth, making me believe in his deceits. But she was only studying their faith when we met, and was certainly not in their truth. He behaved as if he was in the truth, and for many years living in his lies. He was living a life of dishonesties. You see, he is very evil, and all evil is as good as dead in the eyes of my God. Therefore, as far as I am concerned, he is as good as dead. This is probably why she needed to consider me physically dead, as justified in her Jehovah's Witness-owned mind. Was she not judging me? Was Birgit telling me the truth? In reality, my supposed conjuring up of spirits and casting evil spells originates from Magda. Like her daughters, she felt the need to listen to advice given by her friends. Even completely innocent jokes were taken as serious facts. And the stories she had been told by her divine and wise brothers became her reality. She accepted her brothers' and sisters' ungrounded advice unconditionally. In return, she made use of every opportunity to influence Birgit and Claude, allegedly disciplining them. She was studying with her witness brothers the Word of God when we first met in Germany, but she was not a baptized member of their organization. Neither was she in their supposed truth. Magda, the servant of Jehovah's Witness organization, just like her faithful associates, was absorbed into their society without any room to question, believing everything which was often repeated, so that it created a hypnotic sleep state she was lulled into. The situation was so bad that she could not see what falsehoods she was exposed to. Now, any lie would be fine to accept as true. Remember what Jehovah's Witnesses prophesied in regard to the end of the world. It was going to be within the lifetime of this generation who experienced 1914, and yet many have died due to the natural span of their lives. What happened to Armageddon and the promised paradise? I was happy to have stored or temporarily passed most of my belongings to trustworthy friends as a precautionary measure, shortly before the absolute finalization of things with my nightmares. I was warned that anything I worked so hard to obtain might be passed on to people who had no appreciation of me. Bearing in mind what the Strohbachs had demonstrated and my young daughter Birgit had attempted to do, I did not desire my belongings to be burnt, for they had all convinced themselves to believe that I was casting spells. Feeling completely shocked about such treatment from my closest, years later I learned that they, particularly Birgit, believed that I was still telling stories, and that she could tell when her father was doing so. In truth, my daughters have always ignored me and convinced themselves that the dad they have created in their own small minds was dishonest and untruthful. However, the person they considered being evil lived only in their imagination. I was not the evil one, as they assumed and judged me, while claiming that nobody amongst them, the Jehovah's Witnesses, judges anybody. What does a judicial committee stand for, and what do their shunning policies promote? They should revisit Psalm chapter 50, verse 6, where it is written, And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Those memories still echo in my mind when only a single thought triggers them to the surface in all their clarity. I can never forget how those witness friends were anti-me, anti any type of education. For example, during my academic exams, they knew the importance of attending them, yet they were demanding that I went house to house instead, advising that I could attend those exams tomorrow or next week. Needless to say, I did not fall in with their demands and set my exams, for which they chastised me. Going forward in time, initially there was a suggestion that my wealth needed to be divided on a 50-50 basis. But because the children preferred to stay with their mother after they left, it would now be 90% to Magda and 10% to me. I already had enough losses and had nothing else left to share. I did not desire to have anything that was mine burned or shared with those who so lightly disfellowshipped me. Furthermore, Magda did not wish to be materialistic anyway. What they have left me with was naught else but agony, disillusionment, and misery. I was forced into a dull emotional coma for a very long time. For a very long time, I walked the streets like a zombie, but I survived. What I am saying must not be taken as if I am trying to get all that attention for myself, but rather show the world what the witnesses do to many others like me. Some people upholding principles of the Jehovah's supposed organization thought I must be on habit-forming drugs. For them, I must have appeared so miserable, so fatigued and sleepless, and by looking at my sleepy eyes and slow movements, they formed their own opinions. I had to separate myself from such people with their categorizations and group mentality. My ex-wife and children belonged to this mindset, and I could not accept such swarm intelligence. I preferred to remain an individual and not the puppet of a cult. My attitude was exactly the same when I lived in Toorak and Elwood with my children, when they were innocent and happy, enjoying their childhood. I still remember those beautiful times when looking at their schoolbooks, notebooks, and artwork. I also remember Magda's intriguing wisdom, although sometimes using different words, but always meaning the same, as she often declared. If someone tells me something untrue, and I speak about it to others, because I believe it to be right, nobody can blame me for telling lies. I expected that anybody hearing something untrue would need to be cautious before preaching about it as the truth. That attitude never ceases to amaze me. When living in Elwood with my children as a sole parent, I met a number of lovely people, or so I thought. There was an immediate need for $500 for legal costs due to my much-anticipated separation from Magda and issues in relation to the custody of the children. A newly introduced friend volunteered to help me, and in return I was to build a quality sound system for him to use in his van. In my confusion, I thought it to be a good arrangement. His offer assisted me to make the burden I was likely to have just a little lighter, and I was very grateful for that. I built the sound system using the latest innovations, and he happily had it installed in his van. Whatever he was going to use it for was his business, but I knew he would probably play very loud music for a group of people gathered in the outdoors to meditate, as he once explained. He was an organist and an eccentric, also interested in building his own electronic pipe organ. For many months I did not hear anything from him, and assumed he was still happy with everything, but one day he visited us, completely devastated. The equipment I initially created was stolen, and he believed that it was under some form of guarantee, not only for electronics failure, but also for theft, and thought I was obliged to replace the equipment. One could not imagine what he thought of me, perhaps judging me by his previous experiences, but knowing my nature, I was willing to build another one for him. Many other friends, however, warned me against it, and he kept pestering me on a daily basis, demanding the immediate return of his payment of $500. I was very much willing to return his money, but then again, other friends, including Reg, strongly advised me against it. I never wanted to hurt anybody in any way. It was going to be very hard for me to stick to the rules of the land. I was already experiencing a time of complete breakdown, primarily due to my family situation in relation to custody and legalities in regard to access to my children, and now this unusual friend's demands were not welcome. This situation made me feel sad, yet I was very thankful to those genuine friends who advised me not to comply with his unreasonable demands. They advised me not to worry about anything, and Reg initially suggested and prepared a letter to our supposed friend about my current state. Apparently it was asking him now how long he would continue as a mature person with his current attitude towards me. Upon reception of that note, this so-called friend sent me a letter of condemnation, wherein he wrote that I was an evil man, and my children would be better off in their mother's loving care. Obviously he wrote it in complete rage and anger. I have since lost all contact with him. Besides, I had to move out from where I lived, with multiple problems in every possible aspect of my existence. I hoped something like that would never happen again, and I was not going to live the rest of my life with a guilty conscience over something for which I was not responsible. It was not my intention to cause any trauma to him or to anybody allegedly expected to simply by being me and, as I was often told, by my loving ex-partner. After all these years, I still think that I should have returned his $500 for the sake of peace. It was never easy to put my experiences under the microscope. Remember Socrates' wise words? Unexamined life is not worth living. After my return to Australia, I did not intend to stay long, but go back to London. However, there were a number of issues which needed to be finalized, and I hoped that it would not take too long. I had to rent a unit again in Williams Road, and was living like a fugitive and hermit, as if I was a criminal and in hiding. But what was my crime? Frightened by every creak and every door knock, I was already regretting my return. It felt as if I was living in a danger zone. Ever since, I was awakened in the very early hours of the morning in a very abusive and noisy way by officers of the then sheriff's office all those moons ago. I felt that I should not have come back. All the undesirable elements seemed to be directed at my person, almost in answer to a handful of hateful and angry people's prayers, for they opposed me in the severest possible way as dictated by their elders, who allegedly were highly knowledgeable of the Bible facts. However, I will say that they had based their assumptions on a multitude of lies and imagined wickedness on my part. Is this not the case with some people who were disfellowshipped because Jehovah's governing body needed to keep their organization sinless and clean? I decided to seek some consolation without having anything to do with my ex-family, which was bound to become non-existent within my stream of being. It was indeed a nightmarish existence, wherein I was seen unworthy even to live. I was shunned and hated forever under the banner of Jehovah's righteousness. However, being free from all that slavery and utter nonsense was priceless. Seeing me as unworthy, as I was often told by members of the religious order my partner followed, was apparently the will of our righteous Heavenly Father. Remembering the dwelling closer to Brighton Road next to the flower shop, I can never forget how my supposed daughter and her friends had thrown a stone through my window when my Armenian friend and her children were visiting me. I realized that my life was in great danger even then. Those ugly emotions I was subjected to became unbearably burdensome. Alas, I did not know that Magda had also gone to Perth after changing her and the children's names. On further consideration and analysis, the idea must have been simply to run away from a very violent and evil man with the children without realizing what she was doing was nothing other than abducting them so that they had no contact with their father, allegedly the ugly wizard who was casting evil spells. Since she was incapable of thinking for herself, in her confusion, she most certainly acted on advice given by her so-called brothers and sisters. Feeling utterly justified under those invented laws of the Jehovah's Witness organization, she only expected everything negative from me, taking every lie told as true. I wondered how she would react to circumstances if she was enabled to think independently and freed from the bondage of darkness. The new family name she chose might have been that of one of her lovers. Hopefully, I was not going too hastily in thinking along these lines, because the whole observed situation seemed to be dependent upon more sinister and mental health-related issue. Were we dealing with a form of phobia, psychosis, or narcissistic episodes? Was it dependent on genetic factors? Remember, our first child displayed similar states of consciousness. Herman Melville says, "Our lives are connected by 1,000 invisible threads, and along these sympathetic fibers our actions run as causes and return to us as results."